if I can just pass over to you, Alison, now.
Sure. Thank you very much, Amy, and really nice to be speaking to you. Very sad not to be in Scotland, I have to say, because my eldest lives in Glasgow. So here we go. And there we go. Okay. So I've called this talk Making Time in the Early Years, Thinking About Slow Knowledge and the Unhurried Child. And I'm based, when I can travel there, in Norway, but have worked for many years in the UK. Let's see if technology will be my friend. Let's see. So what I hope to cover in 15 to 20 minutes is acceleration, escalation, hurried child, slow knowledge, being with, finding the rhythm, non-fragmented time, slow practices, and slow moments. I think one of the things that the pandemic has done has sort of added to our sense of hurry, or it has kind of affected our relationship with time. And I think this feeling is across many different organisations working with children and families. So this is Hartmut Rosa, who talks in his book Resonance about this sense of hurry and escalation. He says, regardless of how successfully we live, work and busy ourselves this year, individually and collectively, next year we will have to be a little faster, more efficient, more innovative, better, if we want to maintain our place in the world. And the year after that, the bar will be set a little bit higher. In fact, success, strength, and efficiency in the present are directly proportional to the strength of the compulsion to escalate in the future. So to me, that kind of summed up that sense of pressure, of rush, of busyness that's put on us all. And he says we must run ever faster in order to maintain our place in the world. And I think it was that phrase that kind of resonated with me, that kind of an ever moving, faster conveyor belt. And this is kind of fed into my thinking about the hurried child, because if we're feeling that busy and rushed, what does that mean for the children that we work with? And this phrase I first heard from a Japanese colleague who was talking about early childhood in the settings in which she works in Japan, and a sense of increasing pressure on children to achieve ever more, ever quicker. So a sense of the hurried child. So this led me to work in devise a 2-year project looking at, are we asking young children and those who work with young children to run ever faster to maintain their place and ours in the world? And then to think about what alternatives are there to be reclaimed, rooted in early childhood traditions. So rather than trying to say, I think we have to come up with completely new ways all the time, let's have a look at what we know about working with young children and reclaim some of that. And some of that comes from, I think, early childhood traditions. So this has been a 2-year study and called Slow Knowledge and the Unhurried Child. And it's based on 12 in-depth interviews with early childhood researchers and practitioners and advisors across 11 countries. It's also included a virtual reading group to try and get our head around some of these ideas. And then more recently, a focus group with early childhood practitioners in Scotland and in England to discuss some of the initial findings. And it's been funded by the Froebel Trust, who fund projects relating to Froebel's work and principles, but with children under 8. So this sense of hurry. This is a quote from Ling McNair that some of you may well know, head of Under 5 Centre and teaching fellow based in Edinburgh. And when I was interviewing Lynn, she was explaining some of this sense of hurry in her context. That I also think learning is being hurried. So there's this expectation that children will do certain things at a certain time. And I would argue that children need this time and space to pursue their own interests. I think tick box assessments, which everybody has been encouraged to use, limits children's capacity to comprehend the full systems of their knowledge. And again, some knowledge is valued over others, and it results in children being left behind. And this is a big one, I think, for practitioners. So practitioners that want to fight the systems that they're up against, the regulators' expectations of them, and there's a fear of reprisals. So I think for me, Lynn is recognizing there that some knowledge that we might value is not valued by the systems that audit children and families. And then a sense here about this pressure to keep busy. So this is from the focus group from Karina Gervin. You're trying our best, but then you've got all this pressure from, well, it may be your local authority, it could be the Scottish government, it could be anybody. And the tiny small fish, you're trying to fight back the bigger fish to say, no, you know, we're with these children, we've got these skills, we've got the knowledge, we've done the training, and we know how to support these children. But ultimately, we are then almost forced to put them in boxes. And then when they get to school, well, it looks like those children aren't achieving when actually they are. So to me, I think one of the things is around this external pressure, but also I think there can be a pressure for this over busyness that is kind of within us, is internal. So this is Kara Karlsson, one of my Norwegian colleagues. She said, I think many preschools are working in a very good way. So she's talking about her context in Norway, of course, but I think many feel that they have no time. So the question of time, they are more or less in a hurry. Maybe they think that they have more constraints that they have. They think that they have more narrow frames than the framework plan, which is like the curriculum plan in Norway, gives the institutions of preschool. I say, well, you can do as you like, you have a freedom, but you don't use it. I think that they really have a freedom in the Norwegian preschool. They have a freedom that many do not take as their own way to shape the everyday life. So Kara there, I think, is recognizing that sometimes the pressures to perform come from outside, and sometimes there is a kind of an internal pressure, sometimes a pressure from colleagues as well. So what I've been talking about in this study is reconsidering the relationship with time. Are there things that could be done to think about the way we work with time differently within the systems that we have? And so this has led to thinking about the idea of what slow pedagogies look like and slow knowledge. And this is a quote from Sylvia Kind, working in Canada, working in teacher education with early years. And she said, well, it's this idea, I think, of being with that would be the essence of a slow pedagogy, and that being with isn't always slow in terms of time. Again, there could be intensities and vibrancies and things erupting. It's finding the rhythm of the children you're working with, the adults you're working with, the materials you're working with. It's how do we be with others, be with ideas, not just as if we stand outside of it. To me, I guess it was this idea of being with. So I really like that phrase of finding the rhythm of the children you're working with and with the adults you're working with. So I think the two go together here, the rhythm of the children and the rhythm of the adults. And then I think it's about valuing the difficult to measure and the in-between, because sometimes I think the way that we have to measure what we do just looks at the things that are easy to grasp and not the kind of the more that they're sort of harder to grasp. So this is Solveig Nordtom. I love the concept in between. So I think that in between could be one way of defining slow pedagogy, because this is a small space for wandering, for a pause. It's about thinking. In between is this magic space for possibilities and entanglements. Something can emerge without knowing how and to be prepared for it. So it's an alternative to this technical learning instrumental approach that says, well, if you use this, you will end up with this. This is how I think about slow pedagogy. It's not a way of doing it in a certain way, but it's open and it's ready for many possibilities. So I think SoWhat is talking here about an open way of working that doesn't just go down a prescribed track that is laid out in advance. So it's a way of working that is open to surprise, to what children and families bring to us. So in thinking about a slow pedagogy from these in-depth interviews and discussions, these following themes have emerged. Slow pedagogy can involve a rapid, intense moments as well as a slowing down of pace. So it's not just about being slow, because if we're working with children, there can be very quick moments when they kind of run with an idea. But it's around that kind of attentiveness to the rhythm of children, adults, and the materials you're working with. Slow pedagogy makes time for listening and collaboration, and that's been really important in my earlier work with the mosaic approach. Slow pedagogy celebrates the group as well as the individual. Slow pedagogy values play and the present moment. So it's not always looking to the future of what children need to achieve, but it values the present, values the now. Slow pedagogy takes the long way, cultivating over time. So it's not just thinking about the immediate things, but also thinking about these longer term thoughts about the community, perhaps about our planet. Slow pedagogy values the difficult to measure. Slow pedagogy values process over outcome, and it seeks to enable deep learning. So not just the things on the surface, but to allow children to develop their ideas and exploring. So what I've been doing in the project is to look at, okay, so what do slow practices look like? So to think about what slow practices look like in relation to play in different contexts. What about in relation to place? So this has been looking at examples in outdoor environments, and I know we have someone here, Tracy, from a community garden. So how can that be make the most of those opportunities for this slow, deep engagement with children and families? I think it's a great space for that, but sometimes also indoors. So one of my examples is thinking back to a welfare assistant I met in a school, who basically, because of her role in the school and how she was able to work, she was able to work in a very slow way, a very listening way with children, and almost like below the radar. So it wasn't something that was necessarily sort of celebrated within the school, but it was a very valuable slow practice. And then I've looked at slow practice with materials. So for example, examples working with something like clay, and how that kind of can change the pace of working with children. And then in a more learning context, I've been looking at pedagogical documentation. So this way of recording and reflecting that has been developed from the preschools in Reggio Emilia in northern Italy, but gives a way of focusing on events, of children and our adults being able to look again. So I guess in thinking about slow, there's a lot about being able to revisit, to reflect, to come back to these ideas, because that all takes time. Slow practices in the everyday, thinking particularly of working with the youngest children. Slow practice and stories, different ways of relating to stories and to children's own stories. And one of the examples there is from the helicopter approach, Trish Lee and Make Believe Arts, working with children's own stories and children acting out stories. And then lastly, looking at different ways of researching slow. And I think one of the characteristics across those slow practices is an idea about stretched time. So these moments or longer moments when children have chance to follow through an idea, to come back to an idea, to look at it again, maybe more times than we think. We kind of think, oh, it's doing that again, but can be really valuable. So this is Harriet Cafaro, who's worked with John Dewey's ideas. And she says, with such awareness and understanding, it becomes important to think about a schedule that makes it possible for children to work without many interruptions and transitions from one activity to another. Non-fragmented stretches of time not only give children the opportunity for more in-depth involvement and experimentation, but also allow room for situations to evolve, to become meaningful in a way that they may not be at first glance. Within this stretched time, greater possibility exists for making choices and for experiencing the consequences of one's doing. Such an approach requires that time be viewed as perspective, as rhythm, as opportunity, and that the present moment be fully valued. And coming back to Lynn's ideas here, thinking about that idea of permission. So Lynn says, thinking about outdoors and just the opportunities that gives us to take our time. The one thing that I noticed at my nature kindergarten would be I would be sitting down and watching the children play and think, oh, it's actually okay to do that. You've got to give yourself that permission to do that. And lastly, to think about that here and now with the youngest children. So this is Liz talking about her work with babies in a nursery. I think for me, especially working with babies, it's just about being, not moving on to the next thing. It's like just enjoying what they're doing, whether that's changing a nappy, whether that's having lunch, whatever it is they're doing, just enjoying that, because they're just developing and there's a real pressure to get on to the next thing. But what is the next thing? And these ideas, I think, have echoed in the Marvellous Meals project that Falkirk are doing, and is in other areas, as I understand, in Scotland. So taking time, thinking about lunch times as one area where that can really be slowed down to give time for more children to be more actively involved, for it to be a very valued part of the day. So this has been around reconsidering the relationship with time, and some of these ideas are in a chapter in a free download in a UCL Press book, and the chapter is called Towards a Listening Early Childhood Education System, Valuing Slow Pedagogy and Slow Knowledge. And there's a link to my recent webinar where other colleagues, including Gemma Patterson from Falkirk, have talked about Marvellous Meals. So I'm going to end with a couple of questions that you may or may not want to run with. So not compulsory, but my questions were, I think, how can space be created for more slow moments with children? And what might the benefits be and for whom? Thank you.